Call the police. Tell the sheriff I shot him.
Who?
Tell him he's still on the loose.
Is this some kind of joke? I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight.
You don't know what death is.
Halloween 2 is the 1981 sequel to the 1978 horror classic that picks up right where the first film left off. On Halloween night 1978, Michael Myers has just been shot 6 times by his psychiatrist, Dr. Sam Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance. Meanwhile, Michael has slipped away from the scene of his murders, stealing a kitchen knife and continuing to kill, starting with an innocent pretty girl, played by Anne Bruner. Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, has narrowly survived Michael's wrath and is taken to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, while Dr. Loomis and Sheriff Brackett, played by Charles Cyphers, continue their search. Brackett remains skeptical about everything.
Will you put that thing away? Couldn't have shot him 6 times.
You think I'm lying, Sheriff?
I think you missed him. No man could take 6 slugs.
I've told you this isn't a man. Look out, slow down.
What?
Over there, look.
Is that him?
I don't know. Get back! Run! Go on, run! Move it! Get back! Get back, you kid! Run! Move it! Stop! Get out of it! Move it! Stop! Stop! Shoot! Stop! Move!
After Loomis mistakes a costume teenager for Michael, the kid is accidentally struck and killed by a police car and burned beyond visual recognition.
Is it him? Is it him or not?
Upon learning that his daughter Annie was murdered, Brackett decides to abandon the search, falsely and verbally blaming Dr. Loomis for everything that has happened.
Damn you.
Sorry.
What have you done?
I haven't done anything.
You let him out!
I didn't let him out. I gave orders for him to be restrained.
Michael Myers continues to stalk the people of Haddonfield, Illinois, eventually hearing news on the radio about Laurie Strode's whereabouts at the hospital. EMTs Bud Scarlatti, played by Leo Rossi, and Jimmy Lloyd, played by Lance Guest, bring Laurie to the emergency room, and she fearfully pleads to head nurse Mrs. Alves, played by Gloria Gifford, and half-drunk Dr. Mixter, played by Ford Rainey, not to be put to sleep.
No, don't put me to sleep.
Okay, relax. Relax, they're not gonna hurt you.
No. Please don't put me to sleep.
Alongside Nurse Jill Franco, played by short-haired blonde actress Tawny Moyer, nursing assistant Janet Marshall, played by Mexican-born actress Ana Alicia, and beautiful maternity ward nurse Karen Bailey, played by Pamela Susan Shoup, Jimmy and Bud watch the local news coverage.
It could have been your brother Mark we pulled out of there.
All right, so what do you want me to do? Look, Jimmy, rule number 1, never get involved with a patient. Nurses, that's another story. But patients, it's no good, it never works out.
Jimmy is much more fearful and concerned and finds himself attracted to the wounded Laurie. In the meantime, Deputy Gary Hunt, played by Hunter Von Leer, is much more compassionate and understanding to Dr. Loomis's warnings about Michael. After meeting with a dentist played by Jeffrey Kramer at the coroner's office, Deputy Hunt and Dr. Loomis realize that the burned victim is likely not Michael Myers, and Hunt continues to have his men search the town. Loomis and Hunt also reminisce about the 1963 murder of Judith Myers, just 15 years before.
You know, Haddonfield was a pretty quiet town before tonight. The only gunshots you ever heard were start the track meet at the local high school.
And yet one night in 1963, Michael Myers did murder his sister in that upstairs bedroom with a large butcher knife.
I remember.
On Halloween.
16 years old.
It's his anniversary, Mr. Hunt. He came back.
Back at the hospital, Michael Myers kills everyone he comes across. From the security guard, played by Cliff Emick, to Dr. Mixter and Nurse Janet.
Dr. Mixter.
To a memorable scene where Michael attacks Bud and Karen after they slipped into the spa therapy room for some naked makeout time. After strangling Bud, he drowns and scalds Karen in one of the more memorable death scenes in horror movie history. Soon after, Nurse Marion Chambers, played again by Nancy Stevens, who was attacked the previous night in the first film when Michael escaped from the hospital, finds Dr. Loomis. It turns out that Michael's escape and the bloodshed has now become a public relations media frenzy, and the governor of Illinois himself has sent a federal marshal played by John Zenda to escort Dr. Loomis back to Smith's Grove Sanitarium. While being driven out of town, Nurse Marion Chambers informs Dr. Loomis that tonight a secret file on Michael Myers was ordered opened by the governor, and it contained information that even Loomis was not privy to.
What file?
It isn't fair. They should have allowed you to examine everything. That girl, that Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister.
Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' sister. She had been born 2 years before Michael killed Judith, and after their parents died, she was adopted by the Strode family of Haddonfield. Realizing that Michael is on the prowl for his other sister, Dr. Loomis orders the marshal at gunpoint to take him to the hospital where they had taken Laurie earlier that night.
Doctor, you're getting yourself into a lot of trouble.
What is it you fellas usually do? Fire a warning shot, right?
Dr. Loomis and Laurie Strode must do everything they can to try and save themselves and others from the evil of Michael Myers. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill originally had no interest in making a sequel to Halloween, as they believed the original 1978 film was a standalone movie. When the studio offered him more money to write the script for the sequel, Carpenter accepted the job, as well as a producer's credit. The film was directed by Rick Rosenthal, and Italian film producer Dino De Laurentiis assisted in financing the production. Halloween 2 was filmed in a 6-week period between April and May of 1981. Most of the film was shot at Morningside Hospital in Los Angeles, California, as well as Pasadena Community Hospital in Pasadena, California. John Carpenter revealed that the whole idea of Michael and Laurie being brother and sister was because he had to come up with extra scenes for the 1981 NBC television broadcast of the first Halloween. And this was around the time of Luke, I Am Your Father and the 1980s Star Wars film The Empire Strikes Back. Since Jamie Lee Curtis had begun to wear a much shorter hairstyle in the 1980s, she had to wear a wig that matched her original hairstyle from the first movie. Dick Warlock is the shortest Michael Myers in the entire series, and he wore lifts in order to appear taller. Dick Warlock was 41 years old, playing the 21-year-old Michael Myers. Most of the actors and actresses in this film all came from director Rick Rosenthal's acting class. After they met on this film, Nancy Stevens, who plays Nurse Marion Chambers, and director Rick Rosenthal would end up being married. One of the real highlights of this film is actress Pamela Susan Shoop as Nurse Karen Bailey. She's really great in the role, and when you first see her character, it almost seems like she's going to be a final girl because she has such authority in her role. Her iconic death scene is not only one of the most iconic, memorable death scenes in the Michael Myers Halloween film series, but I think it's one of the most iconic death scenes in any horror movie I've ever seen. Not to mention, she's got enormous boobs.
I counted 19 people in that teeny weeny room. There were 19 crew guys in that room. And on day one, and I think also on day two.
Can you blame them, people? Really?
Well, it was a
19 guys, but I think very few teeny weenies.
Well, to that end, Rick Rosenthal, I mean, I'm shy. What can I say? So,
thank you very much.
Just want to let you know, as an 11-year-old boy, to see that on the big screen.
Are you dating us?
It was. I appreciated it. Just want to let you know. I appreciated the effort that you made, and
Pamela Susan Shoop was born the daughter of actress Julie Bishop and Major General Clarence A. Shoop, who flew the first photographic mission over Omaha Beach in Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. While she would show up on Magnum P.I. and Murder, She Wrote and in a couple of films, Pamela Susan Shoop actually didn't act much after the mid to late 1980s. She met Terence Sweeney, a Jesuit priest who also worked as a technical advisor on some television projects, including the 1983 miniseries The Thornbirds. In what Shoop calls a love story similar to The Thornbirds, but with a happier ending, the two met and fell in love. After 8 years of research into the history of the laws of celibacy, Sweeney was told to gather the research together and destroy it, or he would be dismissed from the Jesuit order. After great deliberation, he refused to destroy the research. Eventually, Sweeney had to choose between the priesthood and Pamela Susan Shoop. He chose Pamela Susan Shoop. He left the priesthood, and the couple got married in 1987. In 1993, the couple wrote a book called What God Hath Joined, documenting their love story with each other. The book was a bestseller. Leo Rossi sang the song Amazing Grace because it was in the public domain, although he altered the lyrics slightly to reference having Nurse Karen sitting on his face.
Amazing grace, come sit on my face. Don't make me cry, I need your pie.
Look, why don't you just shut up, all right?
Dana Carvey shows up as a reporter in one of his very first film roles. A little over a decade after this movie, Dana Carvey would go on to star in 2 Wayne's World films based off of the Saturday Night Live television sketch. He would star in those films alongside an actor named Mike Myers. There were a handful of deleted scenes that were filmed for TV versions, but some of the scenes are actually quite good. One scene shows the power going off, thus explaining why the hospital becomes so dark and dimly lit. Another scene shows the characters of Janet and Karen talking about Michael Myers, and I like these 2 actresses in this movie, so this scene would have been nice to keep in, giving them greater screen time. Pamela Susan Shoop also noted that it was one of her favorite scenes, and she wishes it would have been left in the final cut. In the theatrical cut, Jimmy's fate is left unclear as he simply collapses in his car from a concussion after he slipped on the pool of blood from the dead nurse Mrs. Alves. However, in the alternate TV ending, it is revealed that Jimmy survived with bandages over his head, and he shares an ambulance with Laurie that will transport them to another hospital. There also appear to be 3 versions of the Marshal's death. Version 1, the TV version where Michael appears to stab him in the back.
Get away from him! But he stopped breathing! No!
Version 2, the theatrical version we've all seen, where he slits his throat, leaving Loomis and Laurie in stunned fear.
Get away from him! But he stopped breathing! No!
and version 3, a reconstructed version where Dr. Loomis accidentally shoots and kills the marshal when Michael grabs him and uses his body as a human shield.
Get away from him!
But he stopped breathing.
I prefer the theatrical version with the throat cut, and that scene of Dr. Loomis's face afterwards really shows a look of pure terror, and I think that's a really scary moment in the film series. I really like the idea of this movie picking up right where the last one left off. It was filmed in 1981, and I can tell you as a 1980s pop culture aficionado, it definitely has a 1981 feel to it. However, because it was close enough to 1978, and because the director Rick Rosenthal tried his best to recreate the lighting and the feel of the first movie, it does a pretty damn good job of coming across as if it's still October 31st, 1978. From the time the sequel was conceived, it was decided that this one would feature more bloodletting and graphic violence than the first film. So while this does have a feeling very, very similar to the first Halloween, it does have a bit more of that early 1980s slasher vibe to it as well. The revolver that Dr. Loomis gives to Laurie Strode, which he took off of the marshal towards the end of the movie, is a .357 Colt Trooper Mark III. Laurie shoots Michael twice and he bleeds from his eyes. In reality, Michael's head would probably be blown off. The logo for the Haddonfield Memorial Hospital is an acronym logo that says HMH. The Duffer Brothers were pretty clever when they added this logo as the logo for Hawkins Memorial Hospital in the hit television series Stranger Things in the 2010s and 2020s. They were very smooth, but I recognized that logo immediately, and I wasn't the only one. The mask Michael Myers wears in this movie is the exact same mask worn in the original Halloween film. It looks different because Nick Castle, who played Michael Myers in the first film, kept it in his back pocket during filming. Deborah Hill kept the mask under her bed for several years until the filming of this movie, causing it to collect dust and yellow because she was a heavy smoker. The reason the mask appears wider is because Dick Warlock is shorter and stockier than Nick Castle, so the mask fit his head differently, but it is the same mask as the first film. Filmmakers thought it would be the final sequel in the series, so they let Dick Warlock keep the mask, scalpel, boots, jumpsuit, and knife that he used in the film. He sold all the props to a haunted house owner in Ohio in 2003. Once again, John Carpenter composed and performed the score, this time with Alan Howarth, and it was performed on a synthesizer organ and a tempo was added. Some reviewers actually think that this gives the score a more eerie feeling, and I have to agree. The music in this film is just as scary, if not scarier, than the first. This movie also featured the 1954 #1 hit song Mr. Sandman, performed by the Chordettes. The inclusion was a reference to Jamie Lee Curtis's character being in and out of sleep, and adding an innocent song into such a horrific film adds some more eeriness to the movie. Halloween 2 was released into theaters on Friday, October 30th, 1981, and wound up grossing a total of $25.5 million in North America. While not as high as the $47 million grossed by the original, this still made Halloween 2 a large box office success. Ironically, one thing that may have hurt Halloween 2's box office intake was that on the very same night this movie was released into theaters, Friday, October 30th, 1981, NBC aired the network television premiere of the original Halloween.
First time on TV, a modern horror classic from John Carpenter. Parental discretion advised. This film contains elements of shock and suspense. And now, Halloween, you won't be watching it alone.
The ratings were pretty good, and some people have wondered whether or not it may have cut into the movie's box office intake. The night following its release, Saturday, October 31st, 1981, Donald Pleasance hosted Saturday Night Live.
I'm Eddie Murphy.
I'm Donald Pleasance.
We have nothing in common whatsoever.
Except that we'll be spending Halloween together on Saturday night live.
Join us if you dare.
Cool it, man.
This episode was memorable for being the final Saturday Night Live appearance of John Belushi, who would die a little over 4 months later. Belushi was a fan of the Los Angeles punk rock band Fear, and he lobbied to get Fear booked on Saturday Night Live. The hard punk rock show wound up causing chaos in the audience, with pumpkins being smashed and maybe a camera got damaged, I'm not sure. The next day, the New York Post called it a riot at Saturday Night Live, but it was probably not as crazy as the media made it out to be. If I recall correctly, I first saw Halloween 2 in the early 1990s. It may have been one of the very first horror movies I ever saw as a kid, and it has quite a large following. But as actress Tawny Moyer points out, the following really didn't take off until the time I was a teenager in the early 2000s.
It wasn't an initial response. It really took about 20 years to coalesce. Suddenly with the internet, it sort of, I think, gave a meeting place for a lot of people who were, I guess, harboring a lot of cultish feelings around Halloween 2 and the rest of them.
The cast is wonderful, the acting is great, and this one is a combination of the original horror of the first film mixed in with some early 1980s slasher gore and some raunchiness. In some ways, I feel that Halloween 2 is more sinister than the first. Michael is scary as hell in this film. I'm gonna go ahead and give Halloween 2 a 10-star rating like the original. It's fantastic not only as a sequel to the 1978 horror classic, but also as an early 1980s slasher-type movie. I highly recommend Halloween 2, More of the Night He Came Home.